I'm sorry. Are we live yet?
Yep,
Oh, we're just checking for language. Are we allowed to use like the F word or like do you try to
absolutely.
keep it very PG-13? Okay,
No,
yeah, just making sure.
anything you want.
Okay.
And on that
Well, be
note,
careful on that, but
let me say I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Bennell, known to many of you as Destiny. Or what's the difference between Destiny and Omni Destiny? Is it like first name, last name, or I'm just not sure.
no, God, no. I picked Destiny as a name like a million years ago when I was a kid, or it was like the culmination of a ton of different online names, and then that just kind of stuck throughout all my gaming stuff.
Got it.
Uh, and then yeah, Omni Destiny is just for because I can't get the Destiny tag on Twitter, so Omni sounded pretentious enough to throw on there. So.
So that's your background, right? I mean, it seems like from my research of you, it seems like you kind of started in the video game live streaming world, and then kind of got more involved in politics and some of the debates that you've done.
Yeah, I've always been like a video game streamer is what I do, but I've always had an interest in other topics as well.
Yeah.
Like we've talked about all sorts of stuff on my stream, ethics and biology and philosophy and science stuff and all sorts of stuff. And then around the 2016 election season, obviously political stuff picked up a lot more, and then I kind of started to become more active when I saw what the political scene on YouTube looked like.
And how do you describe your politics?
I actually don't. I try not to use labels anymore. I guess like if I had to, you would call me like I guess in America you'd probably call me center left. In Europe you'd call me center right. But I try to just go by individual positions because it seems these days the political labeling is just a nightmare. Even like saying alt right or whatever can
Yeah.
confer a wide range of beliefs on people that they might not necessarily agree with or not. So yeah.
Is there like an American politician that you'd say kind of lines up with your worldview?
Definitely not. I don't think so. I really like for instance, I really liked Bernie because I liked the corporate finance stuff, like getting most of that out of politics. I think is really important. The lobbying stuff is really disgusting. But I am an ardent supporter of capitalism. I very much believe in free trade. I do not like Bernie's stance on like protectionism and whatnot. I think that lines up with Trump's protectionist ideas quite a bit. I don't know how hardcore Bernie would have been with that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's this kind of weird thing where there's this guy Frederico Finkelstein, who teaches at the New School, and he's like an expert on populism. And it was interesting how he did a pretty interesting analysis of how Trump and Bernie both had sort of like populist sounding rhetoric,
For
but
sure.
the implementation that we're seeing and that we would have seen under Bernie would have been drastically different. And like it's fascinating to me because the populist rhetoric actually had pretty broad appeal, but they would have been drastically different implementations of that rhetoric.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you could go in. They were very, very, very different. I don't know if populism is enough to describe, the vast differences between the two, or that
No.
could mean. Well, I guess this kind of gets into, what I was complaining about earlier as far as political labels go, right? Where if you say something, this is why I don't use anymore. If you call somebody a label, you have to spend the next 5 minutes clarifying, what they believe in anyway. So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah.
You've seemed to debate a bunch of the people that are, and again, I don't want to label them, but there's kind of, if you've imagined this Venn diagram of all these terms like alt right, anti SJW, men's rights activist has some overlap. There's like, you kind
I
of are
just call
getting the
them. You
picture.
could just use cancer. I think works, but sure. But yeah, the other
You've
terms as well.
debated a lot of these people. Do you debate them because you enjoy the debate or because you want to actually try to sort of prove them wrong or change the minds of their audience? Like, what's the objective with those debates?
There's a lot that goes into it. It's a multifaceted thing. On one hand, it really bothers me that this side of the political aisle has so ardently like grabbed onto this feels versus reals kind of like slogan, like where they always talk about how they have like all the facts on their side, and then the other side is a bunch of crying SJW blue-haired women that they find on Tumblr and whatnot. When most of their arguments are completely rooted in emotion, like anytime you do an immigration argument, you're always going to drill back to the fact that they're scared of brown people or they want to preserve some ambiguous definition of Western white culture, whatever the fuck that means. Yeah, just so much of that position is unfounded in any fact-based argument whatsoever. So it bothers me that so many of them act like they're holding up some fact-based platform when most of the research on almost every issue they talk about doesn't back anything up. You've got people talking about feels versus reals who are unironically citing Project Veritas reports and shit. Like, this is not possible. Like, you call CNN fake news on one hand, and then you're throwing Breitbart and Daily Caller links at me in the next breath. It's like, you can't possibly believe this. It's insane.
Well, one of along those lines, I did a piece on the alt-right a couple months ago, and it's interesting to me how there's this projection that happens where they are against toxic identity politics, but it's effectively an identity movement, the alt-right movement. And I think that what you're pointing out applies to a lot of these movements where they kind of embody what it is that they claim to be against in a way, don't they?
Kind of. So this is why I don't like to use labels anymore, because there are people in the alt-right that would take issue with what you just said. So your claim here is that alt-right people attack identitarians and they say that identitarianism is bad. Technically, I'm pretty sure if you talk to most people on the alt-right, they would say, well, no, we actually are an identitarian movement and we appreciate identitarians. Their argument would be something along the lines of like, we appreciate that Jewish people look out for themselves and that black people look out for themselves. All we want is to create a world where white people can look out for themselves.
Well, I've
right?
interviewed Richard Spencer, and that's exactly what he said word for word. But
he said he's not an identitarian?
No, he said he says he is, and exactly that
Yeah.
he understands why Jews want their place and black identity is important, but he just thinks it would be better for everybody to kind of be separate,
to go to their own places.
To kind of do their own thing. Are you concerned? I mean, it's in the world you and I are in. It can be kind of deceptive sometimes to really accurately assess the sum total impact of some of these movements, but I this might be sort of like a naive optimism of mine, but I am sort of thinking that those movements disproportionately are loud on the internet, but they actually don't represent that significant a portion of the U.S. What's your sense of that?
I hope that's true. I would hope that that's true. But when people like Bannon, we're so far into the White House and whatnot, and when people like Milo and Ben Shapiro are getting – Ben Shapiro's not alt-right, to be clear, but people like Milo Yiannopoulos and shit are getting, international coverage to some extent for some of the things they're involved in. That stuff is kind of worrying. However, I'm not going to make the same leap that the people on the right do when they say that crazy leftists are taking over colleges. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the alt-right is like this mainstream political ideology or anything. I really don't think it is at this point. Yeah. The thing that scares me is just that I think that it's really easy. I think it's really easy to take somebody that's like a big Trumple and move them over onto an alt-right platform, because all of their if you have like this fundamental belief, this fundamental philosophical belief, you can build off of it. All of these positions, and even though their underlying philosophical beliefs are different, the policy positions are very similar of both of these groups of people. So, like as an example of that, if I take a race realist and we talk about immigration, the race realist would say, okay, well, I want to protect white culture. I don't want white people to become a minority. So we need to get rid of the browns, the blacks, the Muslims, whatever, get rid of all these people. Well, if I look at somebody like Trump, he wants to ban all the Muslims coming into the country. We want to build a big wall to keep Hispanics out. We're okay with terrorizing the colored people here, right? We don't like browns with Chef Arpaio. We support things like stop and frisk. So it's like all of the policy positions line up perfectly. So taking a person that believes in those and then just saying like, hey, do you think that maybe the reason why we have problems with all these, brown people is because there's a genetic reason? I don't think it would be that hard to do it. And that's kind of what worries me.
I mean, you brought up now, we both brought up identity politics and identitarianism a couple times. Mm-hmm. What's your assessment of, or just put it a different way, are you at all concerned with the way in which identity politics is used by the Democratic Party to try to win elections, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, or kind of what's your general sense of that issue, I guess?
So this has been a massive failing of Democrats, and my biggest criticism of that party is and the way that they do their messaging insofar as this kind of insofar as identity politics goes. This is the way that I explain this. When you're looking at people in the United States, you have to look at them by class, right? This is how we do analyses of large groups of people. We're not looking at individuals. It doesn't make any sense. You can't do that. You look at large classes of people. So when you ask questions like what is the power of a white person to be racist to a black person? Oftentimes you're looking at large structures. How does the criminal justice system work? How does our employment system work? What studies can we point to prove or disprove the impacts of racism? The problem that people on the left have is they will take these these very accurate assessments of classes, and they will expect an individual to interpret that as reality when that's not what individuals don't interpret things as classes. So, for instance, if I go on Twitter and I put out hashtag white genocide or something, or if I say like, white people are oppressing black people, that might be true in kind of like an academic sense and like an overall sense of white versus black in the United States. But any individual white person that reads that is never going to be on board with your message. They're going to look at it and they're going to go, well, I've never been racist against a black person. Why are you trying to saddle an entire class's worth of problems onto me as an individual? And I think a lot of people get lost in that messaging there when they feel like they're being attacked for crimes that they didn't commit.
I think that also connects to, I mean, the right for a long time, and anybody who's familiar with like George Lakoff's work would understand this pretty deeply. I think that the right has been really good when it comes to framing messaging and vocabulary. Ugh. And I mean, the use of SJW as a pejorative at this point. Mm-hmm. What's wrong with being maybe not a warrior, but a fighter for, an advocate for social justice? Really nothing, right? But the term social justice warrior now is sort of riddled with connotations, and it's become a really good way to immediately try to kind of deflate somebody and attack their credibility. I think identity politics is similar insofar as Bill Clinton used identity politics, and I would argue very successfully. He did it in a very different way than what I think some are critical of the Democratic Party of having done in the last 5 years. But identity politics per se, I don't think is actually the issue. I think it's more, how do you address issues of identity? Do you do it in a way that is inclusive or feels exclusive? And those are the details that kind of disappear when the right successfully turns these terms into a pejorative. I don't know if you agree with that.
I mean, this is a really hard one because it's like the problem is that if you would have talked to me a year ago, I would have been totally different on this. I've lost so much faith in humanity over the past year of talking to these absolute like morons. Oh my God. The problem is that defending the position, and I'll say on the left in general, is so much harder than defending the position on the right, because the right, ironically enough, usually appeals towards your feelings. And it's very hard to beat these kind of anecdotal appeals or these appeals to emotion. When someone on the right says, don't you feel like you're getting fucked by the system? Don't you feel like everybody's out to get you? Don't you feel, I hate to make the comparison, but if you watch like the ISIS propaganda videos, they read, very similarly to a lot of the alt-right recruitment stuff. Don't you feel like you don't have a place in society? All the liberals are out to get you, blah, blah, blah. The messaging there is super easy, super slick. It makes you feel included. It feels awesome. There's not as much infighting on the right, nowhere near as much as compared to the left. Hell, look at the Al Franken had to. I think he's officially resigned, right, from Congress, or he's put in his resignation. He's stepping down.
I think his last day was like the 3rd of the month.
Sure. The fucking RNC threw their support back behind Roy Moore in the Alabama election, and Trump is still in there. No one even bats an eye at that stuff. Republicans are ruthless when it comes to politics, and Democrats are so concerned always. And I don't mean this negatively. Maybe this is important, in trying to be, morally correct or morally righteous and whatnot. But Republicans, the efficacy of their political movements is brutal. It's ruthless. Their messaging is very simple. All of their ideas are very easy to defend. And anytime you want to attack something on the left, it's or if you're on the left and you want to attack a right-leaning idea, those arguments are all really fucking complicated. They're very complicated to defend.
I'm glad you're bringing this up because last semester I had the pleasure and also the shock of actually going through the work of doing it, of teaching as an adjunct at a college here in the Boston area, and I talked about the sort of structural advantage that the right has on a lot of issues, and it's two examples I think are really sort of demonstrative or illustrative of the issue is, for example, taxes, right? The argument on the right is a very simple one, which is, it's your money. You should keep it. That is so succinct, pithy, and effective, whereas the argument on the left isn't the opposite. It's not, hey, it's the government's money, so your tax rate should be as high as possible. It's, well, we all feel entitled to the money we've earned, but we have to realize that to have a basic standard of living, the government does need... You've already lost, right? Because
of course.
You're already in there.
Look at your messaging. Yeah, of course. Yep. Yeah. Well, technically, the money that you earn could be, you could earn more money if more people are doing successful in the United States. And if you've got more money going to education, you've got a larger consumer base. Like, yeah, you're getting bogged down in these arguments. Like, you're already lost, like, past, like, the first sentence.
Absolutely.
Are you familiar with Sargon of Akkad?
Yeah, so I referred to him as Carl Benjamin myself. I don't know.
Okay.
That's what I call him.
He's got it. There's a lot of nicknames for him. I won't use any of them here, but
Well, that's his
so,
actual. For whatever reason, I
yeah, yeah.
struggle to even accept that his name is Sargon, of Akkad.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can understand that. That might even rival Omni Destiny in terms of pretentiousness. But so like a great example with him is I've had two very long conversations with him. Are you familiar with Ben Shapiro's 3 big talking points on how to make it to the middle class? I think it's like,
I've not heard that.
Okay, I hear these parroted a lot. One is like, I think one is get married before having kids. 2, or don't have a kid in college. 2 is like get a job out of high school. And then 3 is something. I don't remember the third one, but there's these like 3 really basic points, and and they sound really good, but people never realize that there's so much baked into all of these. So for instance, like don't have a kid in high school. Well, if you're wealthy, the chances of that happening are much less because for a variety of reasons, for no other reason, because you can afford an abortion. If you're 16, 15 years old and you're in a wealthy family, you can get an abortion all you want. You've also got greater access to contraception. You also probably have more things to do than just fuck people, right? Like, poor people tend to have not as much access to luxury things, not as much access to extracurriculars, et cetera, et cetera. So, you default to a lot of other stuff. But I remember my conversation with Carl. We got into this big debate on black people in the United States and on the on kind of like the economic and social plight of the black person in the United States. And like his go-to argument for everything was, if the family unit was strong, black people would be doing so much better, which I agree with, of course. So then he's like, well, black people just need to get married. And I'm like, well, it's not that simple, Carl. People don't just make decisions to get married. There's a lot of prerequisites for that. And then Carl, unironically, will scream at me, where's the law that keeps black people from getting married? And it's like fuck, nothing works that way, or like, where's the law that keeps women from working in colleges or getting certain jobs?
Yeah.
It's like,
there's a basic, that connects to just a fundamental logical fallacy, which is just because you might be able to correlate getting married before having kids with being in the middle class, you don't enter the middle class. I think we just lost you for a second there. You don't enter the middle class just because of when you get married, right? And it's a standard textbook logical fallacy.
Financial success is oftentimes a prerequisite towards getting married, and this isn't even a controversial position. You can if you're in chat right now, you can just Google like marriage, wealthy people, and you'll see that like, oh, it seems like marriage is generally something that only wealthy people do, right? That marriage is a symptom of success, not a cause of it. That 2 poor people getting married won't make them successful. That's not how that works. It's not how any of it works.
The other example I was going to bring up, and it's sort of similar to the taxed one, is abortion, right? Hey, after conception, it's a life, and abortion is murder. Clear, simple. Everybody, you could agree or disagree, but everybody gets that. The position on the left isn't kill kids up until they're 18, right? It's not the opposite of that. It's, it's more complicated than that. And exactly when does it become a late-term abortion? You've lost with a lot of people already.
For sure.
Yeah.
For full disclosure, I'm actually pro-life for that reason. But I don't think I would ever make it illegal. That's a whole other topic. But I agree that argument is very difficult to have.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I'm pro-choice, but I don't want people to be in positions where they need to have abortions, right?
Yeah, but that's my big thing. Like I'm very much pro-life because I don't want abortions to happen. But how can you be pro-life but then like anti-sex ed, anti-access to contraception?
That's exactly.
Like, how do you reconcile these positions in your mind?
Absolutely. Hey, how do you deal with? I think I'm guessing you probably are the target of at least some anti-Semitism online.
Apparently, I just became Jewish a couple weeks ago, and in a fight that I had with somebody else. Apparently, everybody thinks I'm actually Jewish now, so that's like a new thing I've been dealing with.
But what is like? How do you identify religiously?
I'm very much atheist, very strongly atheist.
Are you ethnically Jewish?
No, I'm not. Nothing.
Oh, you're not. Oh, okay, so I read online that you were Jewish. Maybe somebody got to
well,
something.
There you go, my dude. Yeah, that's how it goes.
That's how it works.
A lot of people think I'm like unironically Jewish now, which is a big part of the alt-right platform.
Yeah.
Is talking about the Jewish question, the idea that the Jews are all in control of the media and everything. Yeah.
Oh, it's a major problem. Okay, well, so anyway, we'll skip that.
Oh, you agree that the Jewish people being in control of everything is a major problem? Is that?
No, I think that the problem of people believing that is the problem. No, but I mean more generally, like I recently had a conversation with my audience about should I even waste time on Twitter and YouTube, kind of engaging with trolls and YouTube drama and all this type of stuff. And you seem to like to mix it up to some degree. I mean, is that again similar question to the debating? Is it because you enjoy it? Is it because any publicity is good publicity? Is it merely to try to get under people's skin? Do you have a lot of free time on your hands?
So I feel like the big thing that I've always had is that it seems like left-leaning people are oftentimes pretty scared to engage right-leaning people for a variety of reasons. I've had a really, I don't want to like talk it up, but I've had a pretty hardcore like background on the internet. Like I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of crazy shit on the internet for a decent amount of time. So I think that I'm pretty uniquely built to kind of engage these sorts of people in conversation, such that a lot of people on the left in terms of YouTube politics aren't really comfortable doing it. You know, I to some extent revel in jumping into the shit show because it to some extent it is entertaining to me. In terms of like goals, I kind of have like, I always say that I have two goals. I kind of have three now, I guess. Like I just want people to be having fact-based conversations that like, so when you're talking about things, we're talking about real things. So for instance, we can talk about the rise in immigrant crime in Europe without saying that Sweden is literally on fire. You know, like that's a conversation that's possible to have. And then make sure that people are making like reasonable or realistic arguments. So for instance, if you're trying to say that we need to do everything we can to improve the economy, you can't in the next hand say that we need to stop all immigration, because those two things fly right in the face of one another. And then kind of like my third thing now, I guess, is that typically what I'm aiming for when I have these conversations, it's very clear that I'm never budging the demagogues on the other side. I'm usually aiming for the people in the middle. I call it like the 40-40-20 thing, where like 40% of both sides are dug in. Everybody that watches me that's my huge fan is always going to say I crushed every debate, regardless of whether I perform well or not. 40%, on the other side are always going to say that. But there's this 20% in the middle that I legitimately find are on the fence who will come over to my side after I've had these conversations. And I get tons of emails from people that used to be huge Sargon fans, huge Stefan Molyneux fans, fans of all of these really crazy people online who will say like, oh, hey, Dust, I'd heard a lot of bad things about you. And then I saw you had a conversation with, insert my idol on YouTube here. And wow, you sounded really articulate and you brought up a lot of really good arguments. And I appreciate that. And I'm kind of moving more towards your direction. I get a lot of those kinds of emails, which feel really good. So
I'm actually concerned. The thing that, you can engage or not with this person, that person, antagonists, just random people on Twitter, whatever. I actually am genuinely scared by the number of people that are following some of these, I don't even know what to call them, right? Like
idiots. I just say stupid. Some of them are stupid.
Where they're sort of like, they fall for I guess it's the delivery and the sometimes pseudo-eloquence or articulate nature of people.
It's the messaging.
Maybe it is the messaging. Sometimes I think the messaging, quite frankly, isn't that good. And they sometimes don't realize they might be following people who believe absolutely outrageous things that you would be borderline referred to a mental health professional for believing. And they can sort of put that aside because they find either, like you're saying, the messaging interesting, or they like the delivery, or whatever the case may be. And that's really the group I'm scared of, where like I wonder, if there's this many people kind of out in the world with these outrageous beliefs that have no connection to facts at all, then this has implications in the economy. It has implications electorally, and I think obviously we're seeing that. It's just downright scary to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, imagine a world where we get people that are all kind of like moving towards a certain direction because of propaganda, and we leave something incredibly important up to like a referendum that might determine like the future of your country, and maybe you're standing in like a really large body like the European Union. Like that would be horrible,
How do you, so that's actually an interesting one, because I talk a lot on my program about
Brexit?
No, not about Brexit at all, actually. We want the legislative agenda of our elected officials to reflect the desires of the constituency. And we see that with a lot of issues that doesn't happen. Net neutrality is a good example. Who was for repealing net neutrality? Very, very few people. But somehow it's something that just kind of happened, and we're sort of looking the other way. Yeah, Democrats are trying to reverse it, but it's not going to happen. On the other hand, there's the concern that if you do leave the legislation to the people and have it closely reflect what people want some pretty crazy stuff pretty often. So I just sort of don't know how to make sense of that, how to put those two together in terms of a sort of policy or ideology. Are you worried about that idea?
At this point, I've talked to so many people. I'm not good to talk to about this because I have lost all faith in democracy. I don't know. I guess like trying to give like a more balanced answer. I guess this is kind of the way that the United States government is set up, right? We have the House of Representatives, which is modeled after population in the United States, so what most people want, and then we have the Senate that's kind of there to be more equally reflective of each individual state. And then we have the Supreme Court to serve as a counterbalance to the fundamental constitutional rights that we hopefully ensure to every citizen. So like, I guess I would kind of hope that that balance of power kind of works to make sure that we're not moving in a direction that screws over, certain groups of people. But
yeah, I don't know. How are you feeling about that? You think it's working?
Yeah, I think we've moved in better directions over time. It's easy to get lost. I try to maintain some level of optimism, but I mean, like gay marriage is legalized. We've overturned a lot of like bad voter shit. I think gerrymandering in North Carolina is being looked at now as well.
Yeah.
I hope that we continue to move in a more progressive direction. I think that the Trump stuff is probably good. Hopefully it serves as a big wake-up call to people on the left that they need to work on improving their messaging and that we need to be more vigilant about how we address people on the right, since our messaging before was absolutely deplorable, you might say. But
is there a particular issue where you think that the left would most benefit from better messaging? Is it like a particular economic issue, social, whatever, really, like a particular
Sure.
area of opportunity?
So populism works, in my opinion, because negativity sells much better than positivity. This is just like a fact of the media, right? Like it's just a fact of life.
Yeah.
Bernie's message was very popular because people do feel screwed a little bit, and he tapped into that a lot. And Trump obviously taps into it a lot. I think the kind of like taking a step back, like a general problem is that globalism. So when you say globalism, a lot of people get a lot of really negative thoughts in their head immediately. Globalism has been one of the most positive impacts worldwide to every single person on this planet. Like,
well, but it's because
shit.
of Alex Jones, right? Who says it globalism, and then it's horrible.
Yeah, sure. Or a bunch of people that do that kind of messaging on the right. But to be fair, there are some people that are negatively impacted by globalism. That whole the whole Rust Belt in the United States. People in Michigan, people in Detroit, West Virginia. You can see like huge impacts of people that are negatively impacted by globalism. And this happened in the United Kingdom as well. People that are impacted in certain ways. These people have to be addressed. You can't just pretend that they don't exist and say, well, as a collective, we're doing way better. And if you're having an individual problem, get with the program, which is what Hillary tried to do, right? This is why like her slogan of America's already great. Well, okay, now you just completely lost everybody that does feel a little bit fucked. All the people that Bernie, was representing, and then the people that Trump are representing. I think it's really important as a person on the left to acknowledge that there are some shortcomings to the things you advocate for, and that you have to be ready to reconcile those shortcomings, or rather to compensate the people that are impacted by those shortcomings.
Well, that I think also, and sorry, not to jump in, but on that note, that's why I also think that the success of Trump's, call it America First or the U.S. going it alone or whatever, it's particularly dangerous now, not only because of what you're talking about the big picture benefits of so-called globalism, but a lot of the problems we're dealing with now, one country can't really solve, right? So
For sure.
Climate change is an example, right? Pollution does not respect the lines on a map, for lack of putting it a different way. And there kind of are no nationalist solutions to that and other problems that we're dealing with. So I think it's a particularly bad time to be espousing that idea.
Yeah, for sure. Everything about Trump's foreign policy is just a total disaster. I don't even think we're going to get very far with any of it, just because I think even Republicans would realize like anything involving protectionism is really fucking bad when your export-import market, when so much of the value chains of so many of your international companies are exported overseas. Any kind of protectionist policy is going to be a disaster. You start putting up, you start getting in a trade war with China. The cost of every electronic good and every manufactured good in the United States is rising twofold. You start doing trade wars with Mexico ago, the cost of all of your automobiles is going up by 50%. Like what? Yeah, these are just really stupid. This is what I talk about when I said like earlier about fact-based logical arguments. Like Trump's arguments insofar as protectionism go are absolutely abysmal. They're the dumbest arguments I've ever heard in my life, and they won't help anybody.
What are your other, so you're against protectionism, but economically, what are your other views? Taxation, for example, is there a particular country's economic model that you sort of are more aligned with?
These questions are really big and really challenging. I'm not sure. I'm basically like, I guess the way that you would summarize my views is I'm really big on free markets. I think that markets work really well, but I think you have to acknowledge the shortcoming of markets and what they're able to address. So for instance, pollution, that's an externality that isn't accounted for in anybody's budget sheet. So there's no reason to take into account pollution when you run a factory. Why would you? If you take it into account and the person across the street doesn't, your factory is non-competitive, you know? So this is where programs like cap and trade come in, where if you find a way to make pollution show up on a balance sheet, now you can incentivize the market to develop a solution for it.
That's kind of the problem of the commons in a way, right? And the example that people often give is if you imagine like some common grazing area for everybody's cattle. It works really well if everybody says you can graze for 15 minutes a day because otherwise there's not enough. But as soon as you have someone who says, hey, you know what, there's 1,000 of us, if I let my cattle graze for an hour, big picture, it's not a big change, but I'll be way better off. Unless you have something that's going to regulate everybody choosing to do that, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, exactly. So like you have, if you're a reasonable person, you have to acknowledge that government intervention needs to happen in some of these things. When you look at things like healthcare, it seems to me that that's just not something that the free market can provide. The United States has very unique problems in healthcare that no other country in the world has. And it seems like most other countries in the Western world have moved to some sort of government-supported single-payer system with a private option or whatever. You look at Canada's healthcare system, you look at the NHS in the United Kingdom. Like most people seem to have the healthcare stuff way more figured out than we do in the United States. And the most troubling part is that when you look at these systems that are kind of failing us, education is another one. It's not like we shortchange it. We oftentimes spend more or the most in the world than anybody else on these systems. And I'm not even talking in absolute values. When you break it down like per capita or as a percentage of GDP, we spend more on things like healthcare, more on things like education, and we're not getting anything for it. So so it seems like, and when you look at all these other countries that have it figured out in more of like, I say like in a socialized sense, I don't know, where the government is intervening more on these particular markets. It seems like there are some markets that require government intervention. So when they do, then you advocate for government intervention there with responsible oversight. And then other things, you leave up to the free market to let the markets do what markets do best, which is innovate and provide solutions to problems.
There's also, the hypocrisy of the so-called free market conservative or whatever, who doesn't actually seem to want a free market in some places. Like, for example, when it comes to energy, subsidizing oil and not alternative energy. And I'm not an absolutist really in anything, right? So I'm not but if you claim to be something and then you so clearly are not, there needs to be some accounting for that. And that's basically unquestioned in the U.S. I hate this talking point of there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans. Major problems with the two-party duopoly. On many issues, there really is no effective difference. But on many issues, there is a difference between Democrats and Republicans. However, on this issue, I do think that even most Democrats don't really question the fact that the government does play favorites, and not always when it makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, which is, oversight is very important. I'm not going to deny that. Being an American. Are you American or Canadian?
I'm from Argentina originally, but I'm a U.S. citizen now.
Okay.
I'm
cool.
completely legal in my residence and
Sure.
living in the United States.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess just like being an American, I have a fundamental hatred of the government. I think that if it's possible for the free market and the government to compete on anything, I think the free market will always outperform the government. It's just you have to recognize that there are some instances where the government is the only one that can provide, a solution to this problem that the free market just can't deliver it. And any economist will tell you the same. These weird ANCAPs or these weird guys that think that the government is always evil. Nobody legitimately takes that position. No educated person takes that position. In terms of talking about hypocritical positions, I'm only bringing this up because I see a guy in your chat that was talking to me earlier on Twitter. I see people on the right will very oftentimes advocate for these positions where they'll say like they're very pro free market, but then they'll go around and they'll be very anti-immigration. And it's like if you talk to any true libertarian or if you talk to any big economics guys,
free movement of working
free movement of labor.
Yeah, Absolutely.
Supply of labor is a very, very integral part to any economy. You always want companies to be able to dip into whatever labor they possibly can. That's a supply, and you want to increase the supplies of your economy as much as possible. That's not like up for debate. That's not even like a controversy that immigration, yields massive economic and oftentimes even fiscal benefits in the United States. So, but you'll see people say pro free market, and then in the next breath talk about how they want to limit immigration as much as possible. And it's like, okay, well, so what is your actual value here? Like, is it pro free market for white people or pro nationalistic market? Like, I don't know what you're actually saying. You have to wade through the bullshit to figure out what they actually believe.
Well, sometimes they don't really know, right? I mean, a lot of that's I think the problem, which is it's
Yeah.
not always been fleshed out. It's the repetition of talking points that sometimes directly conflict with each other, and that's a difficult thing to contend with. Where are you on? I call it constitutional fetishism, which is the crowd that sort of sees the Constitution the way a very devout person would see a religious text. Do you, or I guess maybe a good way to enter it is, do you are you a constitutional originalist or more of a pragmatist who thinks, hey, it's been a couple hundred years, the writers of the Constitution didn't account for, it's not a perfect document that could have accounted for every way in which the society around it was going to change, and we need to sort of take it in context or modify it?
Um, I mean, definitely the latter. But I mean, I would argue that that is the original would be the latter, right? That the fact that we have the ability to amend the Constitution. I'm not really super equipped to do this because there's a lot of people that will get really hardcore into like that strict interpretation of the Constitution versus like legislating in the Supreme Court and whatnot. So I know that people can go back and forth on that. I'm not usually when somebody starts bringing up originalist constitutional arguments, it's usually to back up some really racist shit. That's when I've encountered it. But oftentimes those racist arguments like completely fall flat on their face when you actually start to question it. So like a common one, people will say like, well, the United States was originally a country for white people. And it's like, okay, well, if you want to be like super originalist, it wasn't a country for white people. It was a country for Anglo-Saxons. Okay. They didn't really want German people or Italians or Spaniards or Scandinavians in here either. So if you want to be like really strict, then that's fine. But you can't say white people. You have to say Anglo-Saxons. At least be consistent,
This is the problem of any legacy, almost any legacy argument that goes back to this is what it originally was or was meant to be. Yeah. There's always this question of, well, where do you set the start, right? Like where counting from when is that what it was?
Sure. And then also the fact that like so much stuff is pretty clearly written out in the Constitution that like going back to the white thing, like if the United States was for white people, why wouldn't they write that somewhere? Or like if it's supposed to be a Christian country, why would they use so much intentionally vague language? For instance, like you're endowed by their creator, not by the creator or not by the Christian creator. Like why would they use so much intentionally vague language? Like it just seems like your argument is really hurting there. Yeah, that original constitutionalist argument is I only ever see it being used to push like really dumb things. I don't really care what people thought about 250 years ago. I want what's optimal for society right now.
Well, they try to have it both ways, I feel like. So, for example, with the Second Amendment and guns, you'll often hear the constitutional originalists say, it doesn't matter that it was muskets and whatever else when it was written, and that now you've got everything that we know that you now have. They wrote it without restrictions for a particular reason. And then in other cases, they will say, no, the reason that it's vague, even though it's vague, I know exactly what was the intention. Well, how is it that in one case you have to go with the literal interpretation, and another one you're the one who knows what the right interpretation is?
Yeah, you can find the original intention. The intention was that the Constitution has an amendment process. If we want to change it, we have the ability to amend the Constitution. I think it's pretty dumb to say, like, if we were to create a gun right now where somebody could pull the trigger and a bullet would seek out like a neighbor and kill them and it was untraceable, would we want that to be legal, right? Probably not. Does it fall under the Second Amendment? I mean, I guess if you interpret it in an ultra strict way, it could. Do you think that the founding fathers would think that something like this is, a pragmatic idea to be implemented into society? Probably not. There's a commercial. I'm sure you've seen it before, but it's kind of cute. The idea that some guy walks into a place, I guess, to kill his coworker, and he takes aim and he fires, and then he has to take out like his powder thing, and he's got it. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I don't know. Like, if you told Benjamin Franklin or somebody, like, hey, there's a guy that in a very, very tall building in the future leans out and kills, like 100 people and injures like fucking 300 or 400 dudes, in a large city. Do you think that kind of thing should be constitutionally protected? I'm not really sure what their answer would be. And I think you're lying to yourself if you say, oh, they would definitely say that right should be for all people. I think you'd be lying to yourself to say that.
Where are you more generally on guns? I mean, do you think it's too lax? I'm guessing I'm getting the sense you do. I don't know.
I don't know. I love guns. I've got a Mosin. I've got a Glock. I enjoy shooting a lot. I want to build an AR. Um, it. Do you know Jeff Jeffries? Have you ever heard of the guy before?
No, no.
Um, an Australian, and he's got a comedy skit, and it's basically there are some things that are really cool, and we wish we could do them all, but that one person fucks it up for all of us, and we kind of have to live with it. I think that something has to change with guns in the United States. That's all I know. I don't know what the answer is, because there are already so many guns here. What is it, like 350 million? There's more than one gun per person in the
Yeah.
United States at this point. But we're the only country in the world that has this fucked up gun violence, and the only first world country. Like, something has to change with that. I don't know what it is. I would say things like, like greater, like psyche valves and whatnot, I think should be really important for getting a firearm. Getting a firearm in the U.S. is really easy, but would that actually help anything? I don't really know. If you look at,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
The you'll often hear this argument from some on the more guns in more places crowd. I don't know, call them whatever you want. They'll say, guns just aren't the problem because in Switzerland everybody's got guns.
Where they all have
And
mandatory conscription? Don't they do military? Like,
that I don't know, but the gun it's a very different situation because the guns are kept locked up. But let's grant that for a second. Is it possible that the problem isn't just the guns, but it's something about American culture and guns, right?
oh,
And
be careful with that argument, because then they would say, well, actually, I totally agree with you, Pac-Man. The problem is all the black people that we have here. That would be their next go-to on that one.
you might be right. You might be right.
Yeah.
But there's definitely, I mean, do you see anything in society that has put the idea in the minds of Americans that you can solve problems with guns that maybe in other countries that's not your go-to, right? The circumstances that cause some of these shooters, call them whatever you want, to go and get a gun or multiple guns and shoot at, kill, injure however many people they do. I don't think that the problems are unique to the United States, but I think the part that's unique is, for whatever reason, thinking that the next step is to get a gun and shoot people as a consequence of that problem.
Sure. So this is really hard to understand as an American. I've been over to Germany a lot. I lived in Poland for 3 months. This is really weird to me, but I lived in Warsaw for 3 months. And it's like this in most of Europe, at least in Western Europe. You can walk down streets late at night and you don't really feel like somebody is ever going to shoot you. It's just like in most places in Europe, even in Sweden, even in Germany, where all the Muslims are taken over, most people don't have this feeling like they're going to get shot. It's just not something that most people deal with. In the United States, again, like the biggest problem is there are already so many guns here. That's the huge problem. That it's much harder to sell the argument to somebody like, well, you don't need a gun. For instance, like in Germany, like you would never say like, well, I feel like I need a gun. Why the fuck do you feel like you need a gun? Nobody else has guns. It's not like people are walking around with guns on the street. Whereas if you go to the United States, if you go to a place like Chicago or DC, fucking there's shootings every day. Like it becomes a much more legitimate argument. Like, well, I actually feel like I do need a gun. Like if somebody comes to steal my shit, there's a really good chance they're going to have one. So yeah, I don't know. Again, going back to that, I feel like there are just so many firearms here right now. I don't know how you would tell somebody, like, don't be worried about them, or what should the solution be. Like, it seems like a really difficult problem to solve at this point.
That's also part of the there's really interesting work that's been done. This relates more to violence in media than to guns specifically, but there's really interesting work that's been done by some of the professors at my alma mater at the University of Massachusetts, like Michael Morgan, Shar, and others, about the impact of violence in media and video games. And there's this really common, usually the debate is, does violence in media and video games cause people to go and commit real world violence, or does it not? That's usually the debate that's had. But it seems that actually the more relevant debate is that, or not even debate, but the conclusion is that violence in video games and movies and elsewhere makes people more afraid that the world is more dangerous and that they are going to be the victims of violence when they're out in their neighborhoods or wherever else. And that actually, if people were watching a violent movie and going out and shooting people, that would be a major, major problem. But also this impact of what's called mean world syndrome, as they call it, that has a whole other set of implications that are in a way related to what you're saying, which is people are afraid that they're going to be victimized, whether it's by guns, knives, or just other people on the street.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular research, but yeah, it's entirely possible. Yeah.
What other issue is big for you? Like what is there anything in particular that you think is like an issue of paramount political importance right now?
Politically in the United States, I guess like I have like Trump fatigue at this point. I think that like I really did feel like everything that Trump stood for was like the antithesis of what it meant to be an American. I don't know if people even care anymore. Like every single day, there's something new going on with the administration that's like impossible to believe. These are all like very important issues to me. At one point, I've kind of or they still are very important issues to me. I've kind of focused more now on kind of dealing with like this the sledge of human filth that exists on YouTube right now, and a lot of these issues right now. Previously, they were revolving around things like kind of economics and immigration and stuff like that were kind of tangentially related to race. But now I've been diving more into kind of like this race realist argument on YouTube, which is starting to become really big, unfortunately. And that's kind of where I'm focused on probably for the next couple of months, is talking to a lot of these people about that.
What do you think about, I mean, I guess it'd be interesting to get your thoughts, since you do sort of come from the video gaming and streaming community. What's your sense of the impact of Gamergate, which now is like several years old? Do you see it as, I did a bunch of Gamergate related interviews, and then I just got total fatigue and said, I don't care about this anymore. And it's just like, you know, it just, I'm done with it. And still it comes back to haunt me, interestingly enough, where people say, hey, when are you going to follow up on Gamergate? And it's like, never, I'm done with it. I did it in 2014 and that's kind of it. But my question is, Gamergate, Trump, what do you point to as kind of like coalescing and serving as the catalyst for this movement on the internet that you're now working against?
I don't really know what the catalyst would be. I mean, I could make a lot of guesses, but I mean, it would be total conjecture. But I totally saw, and I've been talking about this for a long time, and I think more people acknowledge it now. There was a totally clear, crystal clear connection from like Gamergate to almost like alt-right that happened. And there's a lot of articles that have been written about this, like about Milo Yiannopoulos and the way that people kind of plugged this all in. But like basically, for Gamergate, so I'm trying to be as neutral as possible. I really do believe at one point in time it probably started with good intentions, that there are a lot of journalists that do a lot of really fucked up shit in gaming journalism. I know that's a reality. And I want to say, I really, in my heart, I want to believe, okay, that people were really concerned about like journalistic related shit in gaming. But somehow, because of the audience, because of the type of people that play games, it was very quickly filled up with a whole bunch of fucking women hating, SJW hating, well, like all of these types of people gathered in. And then once kind of like the Gamergate stuff fizzled out, you basically had this perfect political block that was like, that got co-opted by this huge, I call them the anti-SJWs, aka the skeptics on YouTube. People like Sargon of Akkad, people like oh God, I used to know all their names. Like all of these people that are involved in like this skeptic, the kind of like skeptosphere, Thunderfoot, the skeptosphere movement on YouTube, basically took all of these people from Gamergate that were just kind of mad at women and minorities, I don't know, people in general, but because of their video games. And then it like empowered them to look at, they had this singular lens of viewing the world as like, you're either SJW or you're anti-SJW. And like SJW meant, look at all of these, clips from women with blue hair screaming on Tumblr. Aren't they all so dumb? This is what all of feminism is. This is what all of the Democrat Party is like, And then through there, they got plugged into like let's get, the fake news, fake media, CNN, Washington Post, all of that news is bad and corrupt because of this headline of this editorial we don't like. So let's go watch real news like Project Veritas and Breitbart and articles posted on Poll and shit, and fuck the SJWs and the right is correct and we're going forward into the future and Trump represents the common man, this multi-billionaire guy that doesn't give a fuck about the working class, it somehow became your the same group of people that constantly said, why do all these celebrities talk about politics? Fuck these Hollywood cucks who elected a celebrity, to be the president of the United States. Yeah, I think there's a very clear line that you can draw from like that early Gamergate movement to plugging them into like this very right-leaning, populist, conservative kind of, think base.
So they always, I mean, I tend to agree with you that the Gamergate transitioned very cleanly into support for the alt-right. But and I've heard this assertion refuted by some who whatever their affiliation is doesn't matter. But the refutation has been, no, there's been a survey and most pro-Gamergaters actually identify as being on the left.
Fuck no.
Sargon
does this shit all the time. People call themselves liberals. How? Right. He calls himself a liberal because he supports healthcare. That's because he's in the United Kingdom and they have the NHS. Like that'll be like the only yeah. That's my biggest trigger, dude. Is when people say that they're a liberal. You've interviewed Dave Rubin, right?
Oh yeah, I've known him for a very, very long time. And the last time, so to give you the backstory, because my audience may know about this already. We were, and maybe still are, I guess what you would ostensibly call friends. I don't know. And
Okay.
I, at some point, when the sort of clamor grew for him to be asked about, well, you say that you're on the left and that you're a classical liberal, but classical liberalism, as normally defined, is actually pretty conservative. Let's ask Dave Rubin some questions. So I did an hour interview with him. And to his credit, he never put any restrictions on what I could ask. It was just, you want to do an hour interview? Let's do it. And I did it, and he did it. And when I heard him say something that to me sounded inconsistent with being on the left or had questions about what his positions were, I would sort of challenge him on it. And we've basically not spoken since. And some other people have said, oh, no, you guys have had a falling out. This is what a falling out is because you questioned some of those views. I don't know what the status is at this point between Dave Rubin and I, but we've known each other for a long time and have been in touch for a while. So that's the backstory to catch you up over the last 4 years, I guess.
Well, like the problem that I have is when people are dishonest or with the way that they do their content, for instance. So like I consider myself center left. If you ask anybody that's watched my content, like, oh, well, you're center left, what do you think of Hillary Clinton? Everybody will tell you that I did not like Hillary Clinton. I absolutely hated Hillary Clinton for a wide variety of reasons, mostly related to corporate finance and then her wishy-waviness on different positions, and then the way that the entire DNC was structured, partly thanks to Obama, but the entire way the DNC was structured for financing Hillary's campaign and everything and all of that shit. I really didn't like Hillary Clinton. And you can find plenty of videos of me talking about this, you know? Now, if I go to somebody who calls themselves a skeptic, okay, if I go to any of these channels, I don't want to name names because people, get really, really triggered. But if I go to like any of these skeptic channels and I say like, okay, well, you say that you're a centrist, right? And they'll be like, yeah, of course. And I've done this. I've had 3 or 4 different debates on my stream where I've talked to these people. And it's like, okay, well, you're a centrist. Well, let's go and see, what does your channel have to say about Donald Trump? And when you go on their channel, every single video is making fun of people that make fun of Donald Trump. It's making fun of people that are mad that Trump got elected. It is implicitly defending all of Trump's views. And it's like, okay, how the fuck can I come away from this thinking that you don't like? For instance, again, to bring out a Rubin quote, he said, I'll be the first one to hold Trump's feet to the fire. Bullshit. You haven't held his feet to the fire on anything. The video that Rubin put out criticizing the NFL players for taking the knee, that was one of the worst videos I've ever heard in my entire life. I almost had to throw up after listening to the worst commentary I've ever heard in regards to that issue.
But just to be super clear, is your problem with Rubin that you disagree with his analyses or that you find them disingenuous?
I find them disingenuous. When you platform right-leaning person after right-leaning person, you never challenge any of their ideas. I'm really big on responsible platforming. Like, you bring them on, you never really challenge them, and you just let them preach and preach and preach, and then you like implicitly or even explicitly agree with a lot of their things. Like, at some point, Rubin's fan base right now is not left-leaning people. Any of these skeptics online that call themselves left-leaning, their fan bases are not right-leaning or are not left-leaning people. They're very right-leaning. This is why anytime they even remotely buck the right-leaning talking points, they get crucified for it. A popular example of this, do you know who Thunderfoot is?
I do, yeah.
Thunderfoot is a guy that built his content around being an anti-SJW, but he's actually a liberal. He really is a liberal. But anytime he makes a video talking about, how bad a Trump policy is, his fan base revolts. The likes and dislikes are 50-50. People go up in arms. Or look at Tara McCarthy or Lauren Southern, two YouTube people that are kind of alt-right, white nationalists, whatever people. Yeah. As soon as they talk about hey guys, maybe we should respect women just a little bit. Oh, no, you're fucking horrible. Get off the cock carousel, you multicultural bitch, blah, blah. Their fan base goes crazy. And it's like, how can you be surprised that this is the fan base that you've built when all of your content revolves around shitting on people on the left?
Because you mentioned this, I actually am glad you brought this up. Maybe in the wind down phase of our conversation, responsible platforming. Okay, I've not heard that term before, and I do like it because so dating back all the way till 2010, I interviewed that guy Glenn Miller who killed 3 people in Kansas at Jewish community centers, he was like a perennial Senate candidate who said Jews and blacks are the problem. He's now doing life in prison, maybe even got the death penalty, I don't know. Westboro Baptist Church people. I had Richard Spencer on not that long ago. And every time it happens, there's sort of 2 sides. There's one side which is any interaction or acknowledgement of these people is a net benefit for them, and it is giving them a platform. It's irresponsible no matter what. And then there's the sort of other side, which I tend to agree with more, which is the ideas don't disappear just because you pretend that they don't exist. And in fact, it can provide cover. If people don't know that there are these movements, these groundswells sometimes, those movements can be successful in influencing public policy because nobody really is even aware that they exist. So my view has always been, I say interview whoever if you believe that there's a conversation to be had, but you've got to be prepared to make it clear where their ideas are wrong, irresponsible, not based in fact, discriminatory, wherever. Is that generally your view on the interviewing of extremists?
Yeah, pretty much. And I am extremely in that view. I think that the idea of deplatforming and not addressing any arguments on the right, I think was a principal failing of Democrats in 2016. Not in 2016, but in like the decade prior. They always had this idea that if we just shame them and shun them and push them under the carpet, eventually they'll go away. And 2016 was a huge wake-up call. Like, hey, they're still there. They didn't go anywhere, and they're voting. You have to deal with them, whether you like it or not. They're American citizens. They can vote. You need to address these ideas. But I just think that you have to be ready to challenge the ideas. You can't just give like a person a platform to just come on and preach without having like anything to say in opposition. So it would be like, it wouldn't be responsible, for instance, for CNN or Fox News to have Alex Jones come on to do like a friendly 30-minute interview where you don't challenge anything he says, because then he just comes on, he's presented in a very favorable light, he probably picks up a lot of fans, and a lot of people will go over thinking there's nothing wrong with any of the things that he's saying. And it's your job as somebody that's platforming those people to do at least a fair amount of research so that you're ready to counter any of the arguments that they make that you feel aren't morally acceptable.
So what do you make then? What do you make then of the argument? And this is on record. I'm not saying anything that people would know. During my interview with Rubin, I challenged him about that and said, you had David Horowitz on who said Obama is a communist, and you didn't say, well, and can you give me one example of Obama pushing communist agenda or whatever? And Rubin's sort of general response has been, I'm not doing this to play point counterpoint. I'm doing it so that we can hear the set of ideas that different people might represent. How do you respond to that idea?
They're spineless hacks is what I would call them. I hate Dave Rubin. I'm sorry. I understand you might be friends with him, but I hate Dave Rubin. The way this is kind of like, this is the big like dividing thing that I'm old enough now to realize, and other people need to realize. And people told me this before and I was too young or stupid to understand it. But basically, things happen whether or not you want them to. You have to understand that when you platform somebody, you can't just go, I'm just bringing them on to chat. If somebody, gets, persuaded to their side, that's not my problem. No, that's a reality of the world that we live in. If you bring on somebody that's going to preach a hateful ideology and you don't question them on anything, then you are giving implicit approval to it, and there will be people that are persuaded to that side. Now, whether or not you want to acknowledge it is whatever. That's up to you for how much integrity you want to have, but you can't just pretend that this reality doesn't exist. So, like insofar as Rubin saying, well, I'm just getting the ideas out there, it's like, okay, well, what do you personally think is morally acceptable? Do you have any moral values, or do you have anything that you feel, strongly in? Do you think Rubin is gay, right? Would you platform somebody that legitimately thinks that gay people should be executed and not question them on anything, but just kind of like cheerily let them give their point of view and then, kind of laugh and smile and then have them off, knowing that there are people watching that program who will go and investigate their content later and think that maybe they're okay? I mean, that's your responsibility, whether you like it or not. You have a responsibility as a public figure to some degree of the public discourse. And it doesn't matter if you accept that or not. It's just a reality.
You mentioned earlier that you see Ben Shapiro as sort of outside of he's not under this general umbrella that we've been talking about for
well, he's not all right is what I said.
He's not all right. I'm sorry. Yeah, you said he's not all right. Yeah. What's your sense of him? I mean, I know him a little bit. I've had him on the show. We email back and forth every once in a while. I think that much the same way that I believe that Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad's audience, is at least somewhat influenced because, at least his American audience, because he has a British accent, and that just from what it sounds like perspective is sort of appealing to some people. I think Shapiro talking very fast and having the appearance of being ultra confident also, to a lot of people, gives the impression that his arguments are stronger than they are.
Oh, for sure. I hate to overuse this. I don't want to say that he's dumb, but he plays very fast and loose with facts. He's like my dream final boss, where like I really want to get into a conversation with him because I see people that talk to him that just aren't really equipped because he'll machine gun fire out these like really bad talking points, and you can kind of get overwhelmed really quickly because he puts together arguments like in a logical way. They're just very unsound. They're often built on really faulty premises, and he's very intimidating to talk to because he sounds very confident. He seems like he knows, but like the when he talks about things, it's just God. He just commits some of the worst. When he was doing the gun thing, just really bad statistical errors. Like graphs where you have like absolute numbers versus percentages and stuff. Like just really stupid things where it's like what was it? I remember in the gun thing, like he had a graph of like, well, look, and it had to do with like the percentage. It had to do with like the relative percentage of gun owners versus like gun crimes. And it's like the percentage of gun owners had fallen, but the gun crimes had increased. But it was like an absolute number of gun crimes. So it was always going to be increasing. And it's like, if you know what you're talking about, you just look at like a couple of these things that Shapiro engages in. It's like, dude, you're a hack. Why are you even presenting this as fact? This is so stupid.
There's this super effective one where he was speaking at a college or something, and the topic of transgenderism came up, and the college tour, the college speaking tour thing is a whole other thing for maybe a different day. But and there was a question about like, why don't you think transgenderism is legitimate? And he said something, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like, why aren't you 40 years old?
I remember. I watched. Yeah. I went through this exact video in my stream, and it was fallacious argument after fallacious argument after like. And there was somebody like we could go through Wikipedia and like he said like, well, this wasn't always a problem, like this appeal to tradition. Okay, well, you're Jewish, aren't you? Like, do we really want to appeal to like past norms for how to treat people? Like you yourself have to acknowledge that that's a really bad idea, like that's not. So like they're just, and it's like just machine gun firing out these super points like, well, people post-op transgender people still commit suicides at higher rates than other people. Okay, sure, but it's not as much as people that are pre-op, like why don't you acknowledge that? Yeah. Have you ever watched his most popular video on how he defines like radical Islam?
I saw it a while ago, but I don't remember like what the highlight of it is.
It's an entire video where he butchers stats to try to show you that like 2/3 of the Muslim world are like radicalist, and it'll be like he like picks and chooses like random little poll data points from like different countries. So like for one country, he might say this percentage of people believe that a woman's place is in the household, or like this percentage of people believe in Sharia law, without understanding, well, Sharia law, that means a lot of fucking different things, or they might even say that Sharia law should only apply to Muslims, but he'll still pick out that stat. And then by the end of it, he gets to this final number where he's like, oh, well, see, I've proven that 2/3 of the Islamic world is, extremist fundamentalist. And it's like, really, dude, do the same comparison for Christians now. Okay. And then tell me what you come up with. Let's be fair with the data, Ben. Oh God.
Yeah, it's and that well, let's save the college speaking tour thing for next time. But
sure.
Point taken. Listen, we've been speaking with Stephen Bunnell, known to some of you as Destiny. Thanks to everybody who watched, and thanks to you for doing this. By the way, I've been sort of aware of your work for a while, and recently, I actually think it's because of being tagged into something with you related to some debate that Richard Spencer was in some time ago. I don't know how, but I said we should just do this, and I'm glad that we did.
Yeah. Well, hey, I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.